My name's Bella and welcome to Dhoom Channel's Inspirations. We would like you to join us on a journey, one exploring the touching lives of inspirational members of our community. And we will also be covering community events taking place in and around Melbourne. Each and every one of our guests are truly passionate individuals striving to make a difference. Volunteers, counsellors, and fellow members of the community with unique talents. All of their stories are touching and truly inspiring.
Welcome to this week's episode of Dhoom Channel's Inspiration. I'm your host Bella, and this week I'm joining you from the Yarra River. The Yarra River provides Melbourne with most of its clean and precious drinking water. It's the centrepiece for many cultural events and plays host to sporting and recreational activities. It is also a fantastic key for city dwellers to reconnect with nature and the natural world. It is a key element in Melbourne's welfare, so we have to keep it healthy. My guest today is Mr. Ian Penrose of the Yarra Riverkeeper Association. He's also the winner of the Melbourne 2010 Award for Contribution to the Environment. Hi Ian, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So you've been honoured with the Melbourne 2010 Award for Contribution to the Environment. How does it feel to be the recipient of this award?
Well, first of all, it's delightful to take you out on our boat and see our river this way. Look, it was a great honour for me and our organisation to be part of the Melbourne Awards and to win the 2010 award. But more importantly than the honour associated with it, we think it's a great recognition of the importance of the river, the Yarra River to Melbourne, and a recognition of the work that our association has done to raise the profile of the river.
So what inspired you to fight for the Yarra River?
I worked in industry for 30 years. In fact, I worked on the dark side, you might say. I worked in coal mining. And when I retired 10 years ago, I took on a short job with the state government, and the job was to help restore flows to the Snowy River, which is in the eastern part of Victoria. And with that work, I mixed with many people in the local community, but also learned to appreciate the importance of rivers to our lives. And so, being always having an environmental consciousness in myself, but not being able to practice it in my industrial career, I thought I'd love to work with rivers. So when my job with the government stopped after 3 years, it was just a 3-year contract, and I'd bought a house beside the river, and I went to a public meeting about the Yarra, and a group there started an organisation called the Yarra Riverkeeper Association, and that was back in 2004. And since then, I've been associated with it. I love this work because it's part of Melbourne, the river, and to play a part in caring for it to me is quite special. But also, in trying to look after the environment, we can think about the bigger issues, the issues of climate change and the world's resources. But in addition to thinking about the big issues, we should also act locally as well. And so this is part of our local landscape, and to be associated with that local work I feel is great.
So Ian, tell us, what state is the river currently in?
When one thinks about the state of the river, we need to think about both the health of the water itself, but also the health of the river's banks. That's important to the river. From the water's point of view, there are two matters. One is the amount of water and the naturalness of its flow pattern okay? And recently, and no surprise to people living in Melbourne, it's been raining very well for the last year or two. And in that period, we've had good rainfall, and so the flows are quite good, coupled with the fact that the state government, a few years ago decided to provide some what are called environmental flows, deliberate releases from the upper dams to try and mimic the natural pattern of flows. So those two things, good rainfall and the release of these environmental flows, means that from a flow point of view the water's good. However, the health of the water also depends on whether it's clean, and at the moment it isn't, and in fact one of the consequences of the more higher rainfall is more things get washed in. When it rains in Melbourne, the city gets washed, And where does all the junk off the streets and the river and the roofs end up? It ends up in the river. So that's why the river now, after rainfall, is very brown. It's carrying a lot more sediment and dirt off the farmlands, the dirt roads and the streets. So there's a lot more pollution now than there was during the drought as a consequence of the high rainfall. And pollution is a concern because it does affect the life of the fish and also our enjoyment of the river. I mean, people talk about this brown river. We've even had people come up to us and said, can't you dye it blue? You know, but it is a naturally brown river. Even when the first white men arrived here almost 200 years ago, it was noticeably brown after rain, but when it wasn't raining, it goes clear. The other aspect, though, to your question about the state of the river is the health of the banks. And the banks are important to the river's health because the environment, the ecology of the banks and the river are interlinked. So when we have banks that are covered in rich native vegetation with the animals and bird life and the fish life that depends on that sort of interchange between the banks, when it's healthy and covered in vegetation, it's doing okay. But the challenge now for us, and an increasing challenge is that our banks are becoming covered in more and more concrete. A growing city is consuming more of the naturalness of the banks, and that's affecting the state of the river.
So in your time as Yarra Riverkeeper, how have you noticed the river has changed?
I've been associated with the Riverkeepers since it started in 2004, and there have been some quite dramatic changes. The first and most obvious one is that when we started in 2004, we were at the beginning of the drought. And so the river was relatively clean, but also but sadly it had very little water in it. The amount of fresh water flowing in was heavily depressed during the drought. Not just because of the low rainfall, but because the Yarra is Melbourne's main source of water supply. So we, a big city, were sucking a lot of water out of the river. So the river was depressed because of the low rainfall and the amount of water we're taking out. But today, a big dramatic change is we've got quite healthy flows. So from that point of view, it's a very positive change. As a consequence of the rain, though, the river now looks dirtier than it was when we first started. So there's more pollution, despite, well, I must say that in the last 30 years, a lot of good work's been done to reduce the levels of pollution. It's one of the areas that the government has done great work on, both through its authorities of Melbourne Water and the Environmental Protection Agency to control pollution. They've got a long way to go, but pollution is still a concern. So those two areas have been changed. The third area, though, about the change is Melbourne is growing quite fast. We have a growing population. There's a lot of building work going on, and one of the very attractive and popular places to put new buildings is on the banks of the river. And it is quite depressing, the amount of building activity going on the banks now, and that's taking away the naturalness and taking away one of the reasons that we enjoy a river is to see the trees and the grass and the habitat on the banks. So there have been quite dramatic changes. There is one other good news, though, about the change. I think, maybe biased, I think the Melburnians, from a time when they used to consider the Yarra a drain, many people did, it was seen as a drain, when it used to be the butt of jokes, joke of calling the brown Yarra, it was called the river that flows upside down because of the dirt on the top. I think that in recent times there's a growing and fond appreciation of the river. The fact that South Bank now is a place where people love to come from a time when it was industrial. The fact that people now are putting their front yards towards the river rather than their backyards. The fact that a lot of the industry has cleaned up on the river. There's a greater appreciation by Melburnians of the river. So from a social point of view, I think we're learning to see this river as special. And we would like to think, can I add, we'd like to think that we may be not very humble, we want to think that the Yarra Riverkeeper Association has played a part in the last 8 years of raising Melbournians' awareness of the river. We have in the last few years given, it's now over 500 presentations and speeches to an audience over 20,000 people, plus sitting down with politicians and councillors and talking about the river and their work. So we've played a part in raising Melburnians' awareness of this special place.
Have to take a short break. We're about to enter under a bridge.
We're lucky in Melbourne, a decision by early Melbourne settlers and engineers to close off a part of the catchment for the top of the river, close it off from no building.
from the break. I'm here with Ian Penrose. Thank you for staying tuned. So how is the Yarra River important in keeping Melbourne a healthy environment?
In our view, the Yarra plays many parts, many roles in making Melbourne healthy. Firstly, it's a source of our clean drinking water. We're lucky in Melbourne, a decision by early Melbourne settlers and engineers to close off a part of the catchment for the top of the river, close it off from no buildings, no factories, no roads up there, because that's where our drinking water is sourced from, and it's one reason why Melbourne has such clean drinking water. And the Yarra is the source of that. So it plays an important part as providing our healthy drinking water. When you turn your tap on at home, that's the river popping out of the tap. And we're lucky to have that clean drinking water. In fact, I think in a world scale, people say you're lucky here with that. So from that, I guess, utilitarian point of view, the river is important to our well-being. More directly though, the river plays a part in being a little bit of nature in the city, and this is especially important in the inner suburbs, where the green space beside the river is where people want to ride their bikes, to push their prams, to go walking, to go rowing, and to have that special bit of nature in the middle of a large city is important to our own well-being, whether it's just our physical well-being but also our psychological well-being. There's a feeling as part of our health that we have to have time in contact with a natural setting, and the Yarra is probably our special asset in that way, having a bit of nature through the city.
So it's quite safe to say that the Riverkeeper Association is playing a big part in the conservation of even Australia's precious wildlife.
We feel as though we're playing a part. It's nice of you to think of it as a big part. Look, we are a very active group and we feel as though we are making a difference. And there's nothing quite as heartwarming as to feel as though you're doing something good but also making a difference. So we feel as though we've played a part. We're not the only people to do that. The organisation called Melbourne Water, which is the government's arm of River Care, is doing a good job as well. But yes, the river supports quite an abundance of different wildlife. We love the fact that the platypus are doing quite well in the Yarra at the moment, and that's a beautiful creature. Its numbers have dropped back at times when the water levels have been low, because it only goes where there's water flowing, and so when the drought was in its intensity, there were less platypus, but now there's a good platypus population. In fact, in some of the more polluted creeks, occasionally platypus is seen, which is a wonderful feeling. But some of the birds are quite fascinating too. I wish Melburnians would appreciate some of our water birds. There's one bird here which is called the darter. And it's a big bird. It's about that wide when it spreads its wings. It's a fish-eating bird, and because it dives for its fish, it comes up. It can't fly with its wet wings, so it stands on the banks or a little low branch and spreads its big wings out like this, like a shag or like a cormorant, drying its wings. And when you see it, you think it's great. It's living in our place. Well, perhaps we're living in her place. And to see the darter, to see some of the great egrets, to see a whole bunch of cormorants. The cormorants are probably the most numerous bird we see at various ranges of the river. So yes, we have wonderful wildlife on the river.
What is the role of the Riverkeeper Association?
We officially say that we are encouraging people, Melburnians, to enjoy and protect the Yarra River. What we do in that area is we are primarily an education group and an advocacy group. So we work by listening and reading to all the stories and information about the river, and then sharing that back with the community and with the officials about it. So we use our voices and our ears to raise awareness about the river. We think it's very special to Melbourne, and one of the challenges of living in a big city like this is that people are less in touch with the natural setting, but the Yarra is a really important part of the natural setting here. So to raise people's awareness to the river, not only because they'll enjoy it, but also then they'll understand it. They'll understand the creatures, like the story of the short-finned eel. They'll understand more of the ecology. And then the ultimate thing is they all become better stewards of this part of the river, or of this part of Melbourne. So we see ourselves as education people and advocates for a river, with the ultimate goal is that the river is better for the future and for all our kids and grandkids.
How does the Riverkeeper Association gauge the health of the Yarra River?
The Yarra River is monitored by the authorities quite closely in some areas. There are hourly measurements of the amount of water in the river, which is great, so we check in on the authorities' figures. Likewise, there's regular measures of the water quality done by the EPA and Melbourne Water, so we check on those. We do some water quality monitoring ourselves, but the area where we check on the health of the river is really to listen to the scientists, and we have a good contacts with the universities around Melbourne about river science, but also we are active watchers and listeners. So when people notice things about the river, we often will get a phone call or an email saying, did you know, Riverkeepers, that this is going on, and we'll chase it up. It could be something which is really good news, like, isn't this wonderful that we saw the platypus, or isn't it wonderful that this happy event's happening on the river, or it could be bad news, or something bad is going wrong. So our main monitoring is by listening, and also we have, as we're enjoying today, we're out on our river patrol boat. And so that allows us to do some visual monitoring, and sometimes we'll do some water testing as well, but basically visual monitoring. We don't have to have sophisticated instruments to monitor the health. It's a matter of capturing the data that's already around and listening and watching ourselves. Can I say though that our river patrol boat that we're on today, it may look like it's a 13-foot aluminium boat, an open boat, but I ask you and your viewers not to call it a tinny. It's definitely a river patrol boat. There's an important distinction there.
And what a lovely river patrol boat it is.
Thank you.
Please stay tuned. We're about to take a short break. We're entering under a bridge.
We're taken away. The tide now goes away. And it's looking for its lunch. So it's one of those, when it stands up on the edge of the banks, it looks like a little clown because it's got a white front and his back wing, and it's got this.
So welcome back after the break. As you see, we've just come out the other side of the bridge. Thank you for joining us back. I'm here with Ian Penrose. So what are some of the crucial issues that the Riverkeeper Association is battling against?
When we first started, during the period of the drought, can I just divert your attention? Over there is a cormorant that is called a pied cormorant, and it's a fish-eating bird, and it's swimming quite low in the water now because it isn't very buoyant. And it's looking for its lunch. So it's one of those, when it stands up on the edge of the banks, it looks like a little clown because it's got a white front and his back wing, and it's got a sort of funny look on its face. So we think of it as a little clown. That's the pied cormorant. Your question was about what are the challenges that we're facing now. When we first started, it was during the drought, and we were most concerned about not having enough water in the river. We can't change the rainfall, but we certainly can change our attitude to water extraction. So we worked for many years to raise awareness in the community, but especially amongst the authorities and the state government, to provide what were called environmental flows. See, what happens when the dams were built on the river to take water out, they not only took a lot of water out, but they also affected the pattern of flows. They took off those little what are called flushes and periods when there's a little storm that raises the water level a short time. That's important to the ecology. We lost all those. We had this sort of unnatural pattern of flows. Now what's happened is, and partly through our work, is to get the government to agree to release these environmental flows. And they started in September last year, which was a great event. Good work by the authorities and support by both sides of the state parliament, both the current government and the previous government supported this, so we feel as though we played a role in that. And that was our major campaign for many years. We will continue to work from the beginning about pollution. We have what we think is a good working relationship with the EPA and with a number of councils who have an ability to control the amount of pollution. We're also tackling it at another level. We're doing our best to interact with the policy makers in the state government and in the councils to improve the system, the planning system, which makes decisions about building proposals. So at two levels we're tackling the encroaching building concern. The Yarra River corridor, the strip of green land, the strip of water up through Melbourne, we believe is Melbourne's most important natural asset. And we believe that the government's planning system, which is meant to control where things go and where things don't go, needs to do better at protecting the river from encroaching concrete. If it keeps going at the rate it is now, the buildings on this river, with all this building going on, multi-storey buildings, buildings too close, concrete, I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration, the river will soon be flowing through a canyon of concrete. That's not what we want. That's not what livability means in Melbourne.
How can our viewers at home and members of the Melbourne community get involved to help save the Yarra River?
What a great question. There are many ways that Melburnians can do to help look after the river. In fact, if they wanted just one thing, the one thing was next time they have an outing, they want to go out in the fresh outdoor of Melbourne, go down to the river. If it's going down for an outing to have a picnic or to go for a walk or a bike ride, do it on our waterway. So you'll see and enjoy the waterway. You might even see some pretty birds. You might even be lucky and see a platypus. But if there's one thing you can do as a Melburnian to help the river is to go and enjoy it and read about the stories. The Yarra has some wonderful stories about its history, both Indigenous history and early European history. A second and more direct thing that you can do as a Melburnian to look after a river is to take an interest in the debates and the discussion that happens in the public arena about rivers and water. There's a lot of talk at the moment about the River Murray. Rivers are often a topic of conversation, often controversial conversations about how we care for them. As citizens, take an interest in that debate, and it's part of our democracy. It's an important issue, because we think we can do better with our government policies on caring for our river, and so be an active citizen. The third thing you can do as a citizen is to support organisations like us, the Yarra Riverkeepers. And we have a website, and I'll give you the web address. It's www.yarrariver.org.au. Go there and join us. It's only a small fee to be part and be a member of our organisation and support our work, but as a member you can then at your willingness volunteer to support our events, or just be a silent member and enjoy reading about our river, but also feel good about supporting looking after the river. And the last thing, a lot of things you can do to help the river. The fourth thing is, next time you meet one of your elected officials, whether it be a member of your local city council or whether it be a member of the state parliament, next time you go and see them, say, what are you doing in your council chamber or your state parliament to help the river? Because the policies and the decisions you're making or creating in those chambers affect the river health. And particularly, I want to know you, councillor or state politician, what are you doing to fix the planning system so we don't get this encroaching concrete on Melbourne's most important natural asset? Many things you can do.
So for the viewers at home, there'll be more info on our website. Be sure to log in and check it out. And finally, Ian, do you have a message that you would like to leave our viewers with?
My message to your viewers is understand that the Yarra River is important to Melbourne in so many ways. It's why Melbourne was first settled here, is because the river was here. It brought the first European settlers. It was important to the Aboriginal people in a multitude of ways, as a source of food, a source of spiritual connection with the land. The river is important to our lives today in a whole range of ways, as our source of fresh water, and given we extract so much, I think we've got a responsibility to care for it. It's a source of our public health because it's often the green spot in which you can go down to and get in touch with nature. And I think in a future prediction of climate change, being close to fresh running water will be something that we feel we want to do, because this area of Australia is going to predictably be more dry. So I think take an interest in the Yarra, and that's my message to you. Take an interest in the Yarra, and please consider joining the Yarra Riverkeeper Association to support our work to protect this river.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Ian. It's without a doubt the most beautiful river, and I think everybody needs to get involved and help save it, because it's what makes Melbourne, Melbourne. I want to thank you, Ian Penrose, for being on with us, and I want to thank you at home for staying tuned. I'd like to leave you all with an inspirational quote from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is not an act, but a habit. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Bella, and I look forward to seeing you on next week's episode of Dhoom Channel's Inspiration.
I've been with the Salvation Army for 20 years as a Salvation Army officer, and 10 of those I've spent in the city of Melbourne. I'm married, so I've been married for 25 years.